Hey guys, interesting thumbnail we got here. Anyway, picture in question here that's on the screen is from Good Game, Shadow of the Tomb Raider. And there's something I really want to talk about. There's a reason why I chose this thumbnail to begin with. And you know, the thing with this thumbnail is there's this scene in like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, right, where it's like basically like, you know, the consequences of Lara Croft has made some disasters happen and such, right? Well, anyway, there's a scene to where it there's a tsunami in Guiltful, and you know, like a lot of people die in this tsunami, right? And you know, so basically, like in this game, Lara is pretty much obsessed with stopping Trinity, and you know, she really wants to stop Trinity. And you know, the reason I chose this is because, you know, this image here, this is kind of what depression feels like. You know, it's also what it feels like to be an access man. You know, it feels like, you know, to be an outcasted man or an outcasted woman. You know, an otaku, of course. But yeah, it's brutal. But another thing too with this image is, you know, Lara regrets her actions, right? She starts to regret her actions and wants to make things right. You know, she feels extreme guilt over the disaster she caused because she was so obsessed with stopping Trinity that she forgot about the consequences of her actions, right? And you know, the thing with the normies is, like, they're not like this. You know, they do not care about the consequences of their actions. You know, the boomers, you know, pretty much destroyed, you know, every generation to come after. Millennials, Gen Z, you know, Generation Y, all that, right? You know, they pretty much said, well, we don't care. Just slave work and do it yourself. And, you know, there's even a song, it's by a metalcore group called Anisoke, very good band. And it's a song called Bonfire of the Millennials. And, you know, it's pretty much talking about how, you know, they threw the future on the fire. You know, they, you know, money was their god. And, you know, they built all these cities. Money was their god. And it's like, you know, everybody after this has just paid for their actions ever since, right? You know, much as you don't want to admit it, they have. And it's like, you know, the boomers didn't care about you. You know, back in the day, your family would care. You know, way before the boomers, you know, your family would make sure you had enough to live off of and just, you know, make sure you're well taken care of. Now, it don't work that way. But the thing with this image here, this screenshot from the game, is none of these normies here are like a Guiltful, the Guiltful like Lara Croft here. They're not like that, and they don't care if you suffer. As a matter of fact, they want you to. Like, I had a guy, I just went to the Dairy Queen and I went and got a deli bar because I had like another free ticket, and Guy just looked at me like, you know, I was just the scum of the earth, and didn't even ask me what kind I want, just came back with a just random kind, right? And I was like, you know what, I'm not even gonna deal with this normie. I was like, I'm not gonna do it, because if I do, I'm gonna explode. And it's like, you know, afterwards, you know, I was sitting here eating this dilly bar with my wife, just thinking about this, what I'm gonna say in this video. And you know, it's like, there's this woman, you know, there's like a little sign up, you know, it's got one of them little, like a plastic, not like a mirror, but I guess it would reflect you to a degree. And she was gonna go in the bathroom. This was an old woman, by the way. You know, you could tell she thought she was something, but anyway, this normie tried to get in the bathroom and somebody was in there, and she starts like playing with her hair, like making sure she looks good to her, like in this little sign here. And like it was just weird, you know. Me and my wife just looked at each other and just was thinking about how weird this was, you know, this normie behavior. And it's just, sorry for the wind, by the way, it's windy again, but you know, like, you know, we was just thinking about, you know, like all this normie behavior, and it's weird, y'all, like it's weird. And it's like, you know, this guy, you know, didn't even ask me what kind of dilly bar I wanted, and you know, he just was real rude. And then later he asked these other normies what kind they wanted of whatever, and you know, told them all the kinds they had. And it was like, you know, he didn't do that for me because I'm not a normie. You know, I'm an access man, and to society. And you know, it's just, yeah, I don't know, it's just stupid. But anyway, the normies are not like the guiltful Laura Croft that you see here on the screen, you know, holding on to this pole here. They're not like her. You know, they don't have remorse for the lives they're destroying. They don't have remorse for putting other people down and, you know, thinking they're better than you and causing them a lot of trauma. They don't care, bro. They really don't. And another thing too is, like, you know, Laura has initial trauma over this of what she caused in the game, and it's like, you know, she's very sympathetic, you know, but like she can also be like a predator, like combatant. And you know, it's like, you know, it's brutal, but at the same time, you know, she really cares so much about the loss of life, you know, that happened. But you know, her guilt does eventually get overshadowed in the game because of her obsessive compulsion to stop Trinity. You know, and it shows like a more like darker, obsessive side of her, just to stop this person, like to stop Trinity. And I get that, and because that's her goal, you know. And I'm sorry about this wind, y'all. You know, she explicitly expresses emotional trauma about every casualty. You know, it's just her obsession with stopping the apocalypse reflects her care for the outcome. And, you know, so it's like a battle going on within herself, basically. See, the normies aren't like this, y'all. They don't give a squat that you are hurt or whatever. They don't care. They love to see you fall. They love to see you, you know, drown, whatever. You know, they like seeing that. And, you know, the thing with this image here is it speaks a lot of volumes about, you know, just this topic on hand. You know, and I feel like I'm going to start talking about more, just maybe use an image from a game and just start talking. But if you haven't played the game, you're a Laura Croft fan, I highly recommend that game, that series, trilogy, as well as the old. But anyway, you know, she caused these things had to happen, you know, and forgot about the consequences, because, and it's like, you know, the normies are not like this. They don't forget about the consequence. They don't care about that. They like the consequence, right? You know, say an access man, you know, or an outcasted man, woman, or woman, otaku, you know, just, they don't care about them, right? They really don't. And, you know, they could care less, like, what happens to you. You know, that's like even in disasters, period, actually. Speaking on disasters, since we got this image up here, you know, if you're like this, you know, there could be a tornado come through and nobody gives a damn if you're okay or not. Because you don't meet a certain status, you don't meet a certain criteria that the normies like. And it's like, you know, if a normie wants to check on somebody, they're going to check on a normie. It's like, you know, I mean, it's kind of a joke, but it's kind of true. Well, you know, like what they do is like, it's kind of like a normie would call and say, hey, another normie needs help. You know, it's like, yeah, sure, they deserve to live too. Everybody does. But, you know, it's just favoritism. But yeah, you know, the access man, or, you know, the outcasted woman or outcasted man who's an otaku, who's different, right? Like they, you know, somebody call and say that, oh, there's somebody like that trapped, they'd be like, hello, human resources. You know, like, it's just, you know, and I've witnessed this firsthand, by the way. That's kind of why I cracked that joke, because it happened to me. You know, I've witnessed this for myself, and I've witnessed it from others, seeing others in this situation. And, you know, it's brutal, but yeah, they don't care, bro. They you know, they will start gossiping after a disaster. There's no guilt. The only thing they may be caring about is like all the work to do afterwards, or whatever. And it's like, if you don't want to volunteer, you know, most autistic people ain't going to want to volunteer, right, to, you know, clean up or whatever, because, you know, they process trauma differently. And it's like, you know, these normies, a lot of them, they ain't moved by shit. Like, nothing moves them at all. Like, God don't move them, a disaster don't move them, you know, nothing moves them. And what I mean by that is they still do the same crap. They still do the same toxic behaviors. And it's never going to get any better. But, like, yeah, I feel like that this image is perfect for this, because I was just playing Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and it's like, oh, that'd be a good image to kind of prove my point on a topic. But, you know, they don't care about this. They don't care about the damage that they're doing to people. Like, and it's like, you know, that right there is brutal. But, you know, there's not really anything I guess you can do about it. But anyway, you know, if you can lend a hand to another outcast, otaku, if you are one, make sure you do. Check up on them. Let them know they're all right. Let them know you're there. Actually be there for them, you know, like, and such, you know. But, yep, anyway, That's just kind of the brutal reality of it. But anyway, yep. See ya.